Welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. This is our best motherboard for Ryzen 9000 buying guide. We're going to cover everything that you need to know to get the best motherboard for Ryzen 9600X, best motherboard for Ryzen 9700X, or the best motherboard for Ryzen 9950X and 9900X. We'll simplify the confusing chipsets from B650 and X670 to the upcoming X870E and B850 motherboards, and we'll make specific product recommendations for every budget level. If you get value out of this video, please give it a like so it really helps out the channel, and of course subscribe for more cool PC content. With that, let's jump into it. Let's start off with the motherboard chipsets for the AM5 socket, because boy, AMD has absolutely created a huge mess with all the crazy chipset naming. Now, Ryzen 9000 CPUs all use the AM5 socket motherboards. Those are the same CPU socket that the Ryzen 7000 series CPUs introduced back in 2022 with the 600 series motherboards, including X670E, X670, B650E, B650, and A620. Now, in addition, new 800 series motherboards are launching in September 2024 that include the X870E, X870, B850, and B840. So which one is right for you? Well, first, do not buy an A620 or B840 chipset motherboard for Ryzen 9000. B840 has limited PCIe Gen 3 connectivity, and neither it nor A620 support overclocking. Even AMD's auto overclocking feature called Precision Boost Overdrive. Worse yet, A620 motherboards cost just as much as cheap B650s, so you're not even saving that much money with them. So then what should you get? Well, if you're a gamer, or even most content creators, a B650 or B850 motherboard, it's really all you need. AMD has tried to use PCIe Gen 5 GPU slots and PCIe Gen 5 NVMe SSD slots to differentiate its motherboard chipsets. But the reality is that these features just don't have any value for most consumers. Future PCIe Gen 5 GPUs, they're going to run just fine on PCIe Gen 4 GPU slots on the motherboard. Remember, PCIe is backwards compatible. Even an RTX 4090 runs just fine on PCIe Gen 3 bandwidth, with PCIe Gen 4 having double the bandwidth available. So it's going to be quite a while before that level of GPU bandwidth is required for even ultra high-end GPUs. PCIe Gen 5 NVMEs, they're a total waste of money. There's no gaming benefit beyond using a SATA SSD currently, and that's despite the long-running promises of direct storage revolutionizing PC gaming. So Gen 3 and Gen 4 NVMe drives, they're already faster than you need, let alone a Gen 5 SSD that costs double the price for no performance benefit. The only advantage that X670 and X870 boards have over the B650 and B850 motherboards is that they can support 4 and sometimes more M.2 NVMe SSD drives natively on the board. But most users don't need more than 3 NVMe SSDs, especially with 4TB SSDs becoming so affordable. And you can always buy a PCIe M.2 SSD add-in card to get more slots. But should you wait for the B850 and X870 boards that are coming in September? Well, other than some quality of life features like easier to use GPU slot releases, there just aren't any new features coming that I would wait for. B850 doesn't have anything new over the existing B650 motherboards at a chipset level, and USB 4 rear I/O ports on X870 boards, they're just not very useful for most desktop PC users, basically just those who are in a professional Thunderbolt storage environment. So grab the board that you want right now. So the TLDR for 95% of you out there, get a B650 or possibly B850 motherboard that has the features that you need. For the other 5% who need 4 or more NVMe M.2 drives natively supported or USB 4 for a production storage environment, just get the X670 or X870 board that has the features that you need. But what motherboard specific features are you looking for? The good news is that VRM power delivery, it's more than sufficient on almost all the motherboards that we're going to look at. So for most of you, it's going to break down into whether or not you want 2 or 3 M.2 NVMe SSD slots, whether you want a micro ATX or a full-size ATX motherboard, how much rear USB connectivity and high-speed USB connectivity that you need, whether the board comes with built-in Wi-Fi, and whether you want to invest in an upgraded motherboard audio solution or go with something more basic. And of course, there's intangibles, like how cool the motherboard looks and color options as well. Now, we go through these features in more detail in our Best Ryzen Motherboard 2024 video, so I'm just going to cover the highlights here, and you can check out that video if you want a deeper dive. For M.2 NVMe slots, most budget boards have 2, with the mid-range and higher-end B series boards having 3 and X670 having up to 4 or more. USB connectivity in this generation of motherboards is fairly good, though some boards are way better than others. But if you don't need all those USB connections, you also don't want to overpay for stuff you won't use. For Wi-Fi boards, remember, this includes Bluetooth, which is a handy way to connect headsets and other devices. A Wi-Fi 6 PCIe add-in card with Bluetooth is about $40. And you can get a slower USB Wi-Fi and Bluetooth dongle as well, starting around $20. So that's the range that I would value the built-in Wi-Fi at if you need it. Note that not all Wi-Fi cards have Bluetooth. For audio, if you plug in an analog headset or speakers into the back of the PCIe panel or the front panel, you're using the motherboard audio solution for processing. If you plug in an HDMI or a USB connection for audio, then you're digitally offloading that to a secondary device, like your headset or a soundbar, and you don't need to worry about the motherboard audio. The basic motherboard audio codec is ALC 897, with ALC 1200 being slightly better, and ALC 1220 and 4080 being the best, and those last two perform similarly. One quick note on motherboard BIOS and Ryzen 9000 series CPUs. So you will need to update any of the 600 series motherboards out there to a BIOS that's compatible with Ryzen 9000 series CPUs. I typically recommend just downloading the most recent non-beta version. And the good news is that all of the 600 series motherboards have BIOS flashback. Gigabyte calls this QFlash Plus. That means that you're going to be able to update the BIOS on the motherboard without a compatible CPU. And we show you how to do this in our How to Build a PC guide. Of course, anytime we get a new series of CPUs, there's bug fixes, there's fine-tuning of the CPU, so often you'll see several different versions of the BIOS keep coming out over time. So even after you've updated the BIOS on your motherboard, I recommend you check back every couple weeks and update your version to the latest non-beta version as new ones release. Let's jump into our product recommendations for best motherboard for Ryzen 9000, which are all linked down in the video description, and you can use those links to check out current pricing and availability because prices change quite a bit for these motherboards. Let's jump into the best budget motherboard for Ryzen 9000 series CPUs. So this is the best budget motherboard for the Ryzen 9600X, best budget motherboard for the Ryzen 9700X. And I will say there are some cheaper motherboards than what I'm going to show you out there. However, let me tell you, the feature set falls off a cliff and you only save like $10 or $15. I just say don't do it. Use these motherboards as kind of the baseline of what you get. I would also say I probably wouldn't go with a 9950X or a 9900X on these motherboards, not because they won't necessarily run them, but because they just don't have the feature set I think you're looking for if you're a production user using those higher core count CPUs. This is more like a gaming motherboard. Let's start off with the motherboard I just keep recommending. Honestly, in the budget class, there's two companies that are really killing it. ASRock far and away is absolutely killing it out there. And MSI has recently adjusted a lot of pricing to make their motherboards way more competitive. But let's jump into the one I think is still the best price to performance, which is the ASRock B650M Pro RS. $129. There's also a Wi-Fi version for, $20 more. However, this does have an M.2 Wi-Fi key slot in it and an antenna slot, so you can always add that in later, and they're about $20 to $30 on Amazon if you go ahead and buy them. Other great features of this motherboard include it has 3 M.2 SSD slots to it. Yes, one of them is only half speed, however, it's absolutely fine for like a storage drive in the future, and this is the only micro ATX motherboard that I can find in any kind of volume in the US that actually has three M.2 slots on it. In terms of the rear panel USB connectivity, it's pretty good. 4 high-speed USB ports, including a Type-C, and it has 4 USB 2.0. That's like your mice, your keyboards, things of that nature. 2.5 gigabit LAN to it. It's got the BIOS flashback button on the back, although most of them do, that's nice. And it has a pre-installed I/O shield, which is just kind of a nice touch for it. In terms of the overall heat sinks to it, just really super solid. It's even got an M.2 heat spreader on the top of it. It's really tough to beat this motherboard for $129. Moving over to the cheapest ATX motherboard that I would use for any of the Ryzen 9000 series CPUs, we've got the MSI Pro B650S Wi-Fi. Now, let me be clear. I wouldn't put a higher core count CPU on this, not only because it doesn't really have the feature set that I would like in a production environment, but because the VRMs are kind of weak on this one compared to the ASRock board. ASRock is rock solid. This one's much weaker, and I definitely wouldn't put the 9950X on this necessarily. In terms of its overall feature set, though, if you're looking for like the 9600X or 9700X and you want a full-size ATX motherboard, or you're just looking for incredible value, This is a great board. Now, it only has two M.2 slots. I say only, a lot of boards in this price class only have two M.2 slots. But what you pick up here is you pick up the Wi-Fi, which is great. You don't pay a lot extra for that. And in terms of the rear panel connectivity, it actually has better rear panel connectivity than the ASRock board. It's got the same number of USB ports. It's just that those 4 USB 2.0s become faster ports on this board here. Overall, I do like this board quite a bit, although I will say I'm not a big fan of the look of these heat sinks. So if the aesthetics are also important to you, I'd spend a little bit more money. Another board to take a look at is the MSI Pro B650M-A Wi-Fi. It's very similar to the Dash S board that we just looked at. It does have better styling, in my opinion. The heat sinks look a lot better. The VRMs actually better on this board. The rear panel connectivity, absolutely identical to the previous board, and the M.2 layout is also identical to it. Just a micro ATX size motherboard with a better VRM. My problem with this one right now is the price, $149, but it does often go on sale for like $139, $129, so keep an eye out for it. Let's jump into the best motherboard for Ryzen 9000 series CPU. So this is the mid-range. We're going to spend about $150 to maybe about $180. Most of these boards do not have upgraded audio. We're still at basic audio for all of these boards, kind of a feature of the AM5 motherboard set overall. But we are going to pick up some other features, including maybe faster speed M.2s, maybe more M.2s, more USB rear panel connectivity, better VRMs on some of these, and better styling on them too. Let's start off with an amazing value board at just $150 in the US right now. Only available at Newegg, not also available at Amazon. I'm not sure why that is. This is the ASRock B650 PG Lightning. Now, the things I like about this motherboard is, first of all, rock solid VRM, 14 plus 2 plus 1. That's insane. Insane for a board of this price. The other things I like about this board, you get 3 M.2 slots. The top one is PCIe Gen 5 if that's important to you. The bottom one is, again, that half-speed drive. It's PCIe Gen 4 by 2, so basically you'll have the same bandwidth as a Gen 3 M.2 NVMe on that. To me, that's not a big deal if that's like your third storage drive. It has a ton of rear panel USB connectivity, 8 high-speed ports, including a Type-C, and it's got 4 USB 2.0 Type A's. That's for your mice, your keyboards, things like that, and 2.5 gigabit LAN. The rear I/O shield comes pre-installed, which is always a good plus. It's got great heat sinks on it. Overall, just super solid board. Basic audio, just like all the other boards we've been looking at. Really, in order to increase the audio, you got to spend quite a bit more money here. So I love this board for just $150. If you're looking for a similar board and you don't want to add the Wi-Fi to the ASRock, you just want it to come with it, $10 more, although sometimes it goes on sale for $149. The Gigabyte B650 Eagle AX, pretty good board also. Now, it's got very impressive VRM. It's very similar to the ASRock board in many ways. Same M.2 setup, exact same M.2 setup we just talked about. And it's got a pre-installed I/O shield. The styling on the board looks pretty impressive. The one major difference between this, two things. Number one, 1 gigabit per second LAN instead of 2.5. I don't think for most of you out there, unless your internet speed is over 1 gigabit, you won't notice that. But the thing that you might notice is it's got a different USB configuration on the back side of it. So it's got 3 high-speed ports, including a Type-C, and then it's got no less than 6 USB 2.0 ports. That's mice, keyboards, and other kind of slower devices out there. So you can decide if that's a big deal for you. $159 right now over at Newegg. And another alternative here from MSI. That's the MSI B650 Gaming Plus Wi-Fi. It's back up to $169. This board had been more like $159. I like it a lot better down there. You're spending basically $20 more than the ASRock board. You are picking up the Wi-Fi. You are losing one of the M.2 slots. You're losing the half-speed M.2 on this, but I do like the USB configuration on this one quite a bit. I also like the styling on the board. Kind of looks cool. I mean, maybe that's not a big factor for you. It is for me generally when I do builds. Now, I will say no pre-installed rear I/O shield. Maybe that's a deal breaker for you. Maybe that's something you want. But look at that. You've got basically 8 high-speed USB ports, including a Type-C, and then no USB 2.0 ports out there. So everything you've got out there is super high speed. And this does have 2.5 gigabit LAN on it instead. $169 right now over at Newegg. Like I said, often does go on sale. Let's jump into the best motherboard for Ryzen 9000 series CPUs, and we're at the premium end. Everything is linked down in the video description. Check out those links because prices change, and like the one we're just about to talk about right here. What do I mean when I say these are premium motherboards? Where we expect top tier features on these, top tier VRMs, top tier VRM heat sinks on them. I expect 3 M.2s, all full bandwidth, and I expect them to at least have a couple of heat shields over the top of those. I expect a lot of USB rear panel connectivity and high-speed rear panel connectivity. I expect Wi-Fi and Bluetooth to automatically be built in. No muss or fuss about that. And I expect a better audio codec than the basic one, so either ALC 1200, but preferable 1220 or 4080. No, those are the same performance level basically. Let's jump into the MSI Mag B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. Phenomenal motherboard. I've continued to recommend it. Initially, a lot of the MSI boards had RAM compatibility issues. Those have largely been solved for basically the last year. And this is a great board. Remember, you are going to update the BIOS using the BIOS flashback feature in order to make this Ryzen 9000 ready, even though it has that stupid little badge that says Ryzen 9000 ready. It's got great USB connectivity in the rear panel. It's got 8 high-speed ports with a Type-C. It's got 2 USB 2.0 ports, that's your mouse or keyboards. It's got the Wi-Fi. It's got a full suite of audio connectors there, 2.5 gigabit LAN, 2 thumbs up all around. The only thing I say it might be quote unquote missing is one of the M.2s does not have a heat shield on it. To me, that's not a big deal. If it is to you, then go with its alternative. The alternative being the MSI MPG Edge Wi-Fi. Honestly, this is the same motherboard with a little tiny difference here in that the top M.2 on this one is PCIe Gen 5 if you want that. Obviously, the styling on the board is white and it's got some RGB elements to it rather than just being the matte black. Otherwise, the board is virtually identical, except the bottom M.2 heat shield covers both M.2s. It's basically $10 more right now, except the Tomahawk, as I'm recording this, is only $180 right now over at Amazon. Check out those links, see if you can get that deal. Let's move over to an absolute banger of a motherboard. That's the ASRock B650E Taichi. Now, basically, it's got all the features of the MSI Tomahawk that we just talked about, except that it's a B650E board. That means the top GPU slot is PCIe Gen 5, as well as the M.2. One M.2 is PCIe Gen 5. It happens to be the M.2 is actually up here next to the DIMM slots with its own heat shield. The other M.2s are down here, have their own heat shield. That's phenomenal. Upgraded ALC 4082 audio to it. The rear panel is just an insane amount of connectivity. I mean, look at this thing. It's basically 12 high-speed USB ports, including a Type-C that's rated at 40 gigabits a second, so 2 thumbs up there. The audio section, in terms of the connectors in the back panel, I don't know why they've cut that down given that they've upgraded the audio. It has a clear CMOS button on the back. And get this, and I don't know why every motherboard does not have this, but it has, and that's right, a postcode right here, a postcode on the motherboard itself. So this readout here, if something goes wrong with the motherboard, doesn't boot, it will give you a readout and tell you exactly what's wrong with it. I also love that it comes with power and reset on the motherboard as well. Absolutely love this board for $240. One alternative from Gigabyte out there with all the features we talked about is the B650 Aero. Now, this board went out of stock earlier this year, and I thought it was gone. I thought it had gone off the market. It appears to have come back. Now, this is Gigabyte's only board with upgraded audio on it at this level. We'll talk about their ice boards in just a moment. They're all white PCB boards when we talk about our color theme boards, which I do like. But this board right here, it's basically got all the similar features on it, including the Gen 5 M.2 slot on it. Now, this is a B650 board, not a B650E, so it does not have the PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot to it, but it's got a ton of rear panel USB connectivity, including 8 high-speed ports, a Type-C on it, as well as 2 USB 2.0 Type A's on them. It's got pretty nice styling if you're looking for kind of a black and white board as well. $229 right now. Sometimes this board gets down to like $190. All right, let's just talk about the Asus ROG Strix boards, because if I don't, I know someone will angrily be typing down the comments. By the way, there's a ton of B650 and X670 motherboards out there. I can't cover them all, but if there's one you feel like I missed in terms of features or maybe prices got cut after this video, let me know down in the comments. It's always super helpful. I do like this board quite a bit. However, it's more limited in terms of its features than some of the other motherboards we just mentioned. I bought one of these last week for $199. It's back up to $217. It kind of roller coasters around in price. Upgraded ALC 1220 audio, and it's got a phenomenal looking audio section, by the way. Tons of capacitors down there, good shielding on it. In terms of shielding, let's talk about the M.2s. The M.2 heat sinks look great. This has a rock solid VRM. Any CPU would be absolutely fine on this. I think the one area where maybe this is a little bit less than some of its other boards out there is in terms of the rear panel USB connectivity. So it's only got the 5 high-speed USB ports, but it does have 2 Type-Cs out there, and it's got 4 additional USB 2.0 ports as well. It's got the Wi-Fi on it. It's got the full bevy of audio connectors as well. Overall, I do like this motherboard if this is the styling you're looking for, especially more something silver white. Let's close out the gaming motherboards with the Asus ROG Strix B650E-F. So if you're looking for PCIe Gen 5 at the main GPU slot and the M.2, this is a great board to get. And a full disclosure, this is the board that's currently in my daily driver rig right here that we use in our recording studio. We decided to pick a top-end kind of gaming motherboard from one of the board manufacturers. We settled on the Asus ROG Strix B650E-F. At the time, we just hadn't done an Asus build in a little while. Moving to our new studio, decided to do it. And I gotta tell you, I've loved this motherboard. I think the audio section on it is phenomenal. It's got a lot of high-end capacitors on it. It's ALC 1220. I also absolutely love the styling of this board. The RGB on it looks phenomenal. The board itself just really pops. So for those of you who aesthetics might merit some additional kind of spend out there, maybe $15, $20 over maybe even the Tomahawk, which is more matte black, this is just kind of really got both a black but also kind of a lively color to it. I will say the rear panel USB connectivity, quite good. It's got 8 high-speed USB ports, including 2 Type-Cs, and it's got 4 additional USB 2.0 Type A's on it. I've basically used just about every port on the back of mine with all the recording devices on it. And I gotta say, it's really, really good. 2.5 gigabit LAN on it. Overall, just phenomenal motherboard. Yes, $254, but if this is the feature set you're looking for, and if you really want the aesthetics to kind of set you apart, this is one to check out. If you're looking for an either all white or all black motherboard, where do you go? Well, let's start with all white motherboards. The Gigabyte B650 Aorus Elite AX Ice. This is the ATX version. There should be a micro ATX version hitting shelves, I've been told, in the next couple of weeks. This is a great motherboard. I will say the PCB is white, the heat sinks are silver. I actually like that a little bit. We have the Z790 Intel version of this, and it looks absolutely sick. I like the silver because it gives a little bit of contrast to the PCB without breaking the color scheme. I like that. I even slightly like the black connectors on the board because then it does add a little bit of pop, a highlight to it. If this is not for you, I have another board though. And it's got pretty good rear panel USB connectivity. It's basically the Aorus Elite AX, which I'm not recommending right now because I think it's a little overpriced for what you're getting compared to some of the other offerings out there. But if you want an all white board, this is definitely the one to get. And it's got tons of USB rear panel connectivity. Overall, if you're looking for that kind of all white or that cool white aesthetic, this is one to check out. The other one in the all-white game, of course, is the NZXT N7. Now, this is the B650E version. So this one, you know, it's a little bit more expensive, about $80 more than the Gigabyte board, but you do get B650E. So you get the top PCIe slot is Gen 5, as well as the M.2 top slot is also Gen 5 on it. The way that they accomplish this, first of all, by the way, ASRock makes the motherboards for NZXT. They make them to spec. So that's the same motherboard on this one and on the all-black one as well. And then they layer on these metal plates and they look amazing. They absolutely look amazing. The pictures often don't do it justice. I will say on these, a little bit less USB rear panel connectivity, but it's still quite good. 7 high-speed USB ports, including a Type-C, and then 2 USB 2.0 ports on it as well. It's got pretty fast LAN on it. It's got a full suite of audio connectors. If you're looking for something all white or all matte black, these are the ones to check out. Of course, if you're looking to do a Project Zero or zero cable PC build, with a Ryzen 9000, you basically have one option right now on the market. That's the MSI B650M Project Zero board. We use this on our 7800X 3D Project Zero build. Full disclosure, MSI sent us everything except the CPU and the RAM for that build. We had a lot of fun doing it. I'll leave it linked down in the video description if you want to check more out about that. Asus at this point only has Intel behind the motherboard connector boards, though I do expect eventually we will get some Ryzen boards from them, but there's nothing has been announced yet. Now, Gigabyte has announced the B650E Aorus Stealth, and the board looks totally sick. Look at that thing. It looks super sick. They showed this off at Computex. However, I still don't have any information in terms of pricing and availability for it. So right now it's MSI Project Zero. For those of you looking for the best motherboard for Ryzen 9950X or 9900X, so these are like top-end creator boards, I like the Asus Prime X670E-Pro. In fact, I just picked one of these up. We do intend to do a high-end build at some point in the future with this motherboard. I like it quite a bit. It's X670E, so not only is the top PCIe slot and top M.2 slot PCIe Gen 5, if that's important to you, but it also just has a ton of M.2 connectivity, so it's got 4 M.2s on it. Remember, these have slightly more PCIe lanes overall than the B series chipsets. That's why they're able to have 4, and the super high-end ones have 5 on them. And of course, it's got a ton of rear panel USB connectivity. On this one here, we've got 10, including 3 Type-Cs, which is an insane amount. It's got all the rear panel connectors to it. It also looks quite amazing, $294. Alternatively, if you don't like the styling, if you're looking for something more like this, you can get the Asus TUF Gaming X670E Plus, $20 less. It comes basically in black. Almost identical specs except the rear panel USB ports. It basically trades out a USB Type-C for just a traditional high-speed Type-A. Otherwise, the motherboards are virtually identical. Both are really phenomenal. I don't think you really could go wrong as a creator. Let's jump into the best mini ITX motherboard for Ryzen 9000. I've got 2 options for you here. My top option is a Gigabyte B650i Aorus Ultra, $249. That price essentially has not changed, and I like it. One of the better priced B650i motherboards, the ITX ones, and great motherboard, 3 M.2 slots on it. That's kind of, to me, what separates this one. It does have this daughter board on the side. I've seen some complaints about that. We used this in a build. I didn't have any problems with it, so hopefully you don't either. I will say the third M.2 slot is on the back of the motherboard, so when you install this thing, make sure that you put an M.2 in there, because otherwise you have to rip out the motherboard. The motherboard's absolutely phenomenal with our build. It's got 5 high-speed USB ports in the back, including Type-C, and it's got 2 USB 2.0 ports as well. Wi-Fi 6E on it, $249, my top recommendation. Now, if you don't need that third M.2, maybe you want PCIe Gen 5 at the GPU slot and one of the M.2 slots, then look at the Asus ROG Strix B650E-I Gaming. This board was priced well over $300 when it came out. Right now, sitting at $278, I would probably consider it as a strong competitor for the Gigabyte board as long as it stays at this price. Very similar to the Gigabyte board in terms of overall connectivity, except 2 M.2s, not 3. And on the rear panel, what it does add is it adds 1 additional high-speed Type-C port in terms of its overall connectivity. Otherwise, both are fantastic boards, upgraded audio on them. Really can't go wrong with either one. Remember to check out those links down in the video description for current pricing and availability in your region. And if you got value out of this video, please give it a like. It really does make a big difference to the channel. And of course, subscribe and click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool PC content. And we'll catch you on the next one.